In the aftermath of several racist incidents at Starbucks, they officially had their closing day for racial bias training across the country. 8,000 stores were closed, and employees had to undergo training for racial bias. On Reddit, someone asked Starbucks employees, how was the training? So we have several responses, and it's interesting because they seem to be overwhelmingly negative. But more important than that, I'm going to show you several studies that prove that racial bias training has the inverse effect and perhaps might not be the best approach to ending racism. But before we get started, you need to subscribe to my second channel at youtube.com/timcastnews. There will be a little button here you can click. I can't do live streams on my main channel because of a guideline strike, so they will all be here for now. And if you really want to support my work, go to patreon.com/timcast and become a patron by giving any amount you feel comfortable today to support my work. From a Vox.com article, what Starbucks is teaching its employees during anti-bias training. Starbucks is closing 8,000 of its stores Tuesday afternoon for racial bias training stemming from an April incident in Philadelphia, in which 2 black men were arrested for doing nothing. Last week, Starbucks released a video preview of its bias training curriculum. The video opens with footage of Rashawn Nelson and Dante Robinson, the 2 men arrested at the Philadelphia Starbucks on April 12th that went viral, spurring public outcry and in turn, Starbucks' response. It's not an accident that this phenomenon happens in society. And it's an American problem, not just a Starbucks problem. Heather McGee, the president of the public policy organization, Demos, who helped develop Starbucks' curriculum, told me. They highlight a tweet from Starbucks that says, "For several hours this afternoon, we will close stores and offices to discuss how to make Starbucks a place where all people feel welcome. Thank you for your patience and support as we renew our promise to make Starbucks an inclusive gathering place for all. See you tomorrow." They say each store will receive a toolkit to let employees work together in small groups, and Tuesday's first training will focus on understanding racial bias and the history of public accommodations in the United States, according to the company's website. And they link to the Starbucks website that has part of the training available. It says a conversation and learning session on race, bias, and creating an environment that's welcoming to all. On May 29, we closed 8,000 stores in the United States for 4 hours, so 175,000 partners could come together for a conversation and learning sessions on racial bias. Now on Reddit, there are people claiming to work for Starbucks, giving us an idea of what actually happened. But before I go on to that, I want to show you how Vox actually says this might not work. From their article, it says some evidence suggests bias training sessions struggle to make long-term change. It's not clear how effective the anti-bias training Starbucks is employing will be. Vox's Julia Bellows recently spoke with 5 social scientists about the matter, and they told her a few hours of training probably won't do much to address the broader problem of pervasive bias. There's evidence suggesting such training sessions fail to alter racial biases and behaviors in the long term, and can sometimes backfire by bringing biases to the surface and activating stereotypes. Now, Vox is taking a rather light approach because there is research to suggest that forced racial bias training does increase racial bias. This story from the Harvard Business Review, 2016, Why Diversity Programs Fail. It says it shouldn't be surprising that most diversity programs aren't increasing diversity. Despite a few new bells and whistles courtesy of big data, companies are basically doubling down on the same approaches they've used since the 1960s, which often make things worse, not better. Firms have long relied on diversity training to reduce bias on the job, hiring tests and performance ratings to limit it in recruitment and promotions, and grievance systems to give employees a way to challenge managers. Those tools are designed to preempt lawsuits by policing managers' thoughts and actions. Yet, laboratory studies show that this kind of force-feeding can activate bias rather than stamp it out. As social scientists have found, people often rebel against rules to assert their autonomy. Try to coerce me to do X, Y, or Z, and I will do the opposite just to prove that I'm my own person. The article then says, voluntary training evokes the opposite response. I chose to show up, so I must be pro-diversity, leading to better results. Increases of 9% to 13% in black men, Hispanic men, and Asian American men and women in management 5 years out, with no decline in white or black women. Research from the University of Toronto reinforces our findings. In one study, white subjects read a brochure critiquing prejudice towards blacks. When people felt pressure to agree with it, the reading strengthened their bias against blacks. When they felt the choice was theirs, the reading reduced bias. And from Psychology Today, just 6 months ago, mandatory implicit bias training is a bad idea. It's all the rage, and it's seriously counterproductive. The article says, however, the research on so-called implicit bias has its serious critics. Almost everything about implicit bias is controversial in scientific circles. It is not clear what the most implicit methods actually measure. Their ability to predict discrimination is modest at best. Their reliability is low. Early claims about their power and immutability have proven unjustified. And yet, colleges and corporations have been rushing to institute implicit bias trainings in misguided and unlikely to be effective attempts to reduce discrimination. They also add, psychology and sociology data suggest that mandatory training is not as good as voluntary training. Mandatory training has the potential for backlash. A top Reddit post on the forum Ask Reddit said, Starbucks employees, how was your implicit bias training? One post said, all the videos focused on black and white relations. They mentioned feminism once, but it was really untouched. The whole thing felt like grade school diversity day, what makes you you worksheets, and a major waste of paper. Also, they all made African Americans look victimized and oppressed. There was no creative problem solving, really annoying. Katsy says, truthfully, it was a lot less cringy than I thought it would be. Now, don't get me wrong, there was definitely some cringe. Executives talking about Starbucks being woke, dirty sweatpants apparently being some sort of signal for degeneracy, and the term color brave. But it ended up being a platform to communicate with our coworkers about upbringing and biases, and how to apply that same understanding to customers. Unfortunately, it didn't address our actual relevant questions about how to de-escalate potential conflict. When Starbucks thinks it's justified to call police in a given situation, or any actual strategies for removing customers. Their only advice was to approach and respectfully ask them to leave, as if those people give an F about us or our policies. Another user said, felt very forced. The executives are under the impression that black people are the only ones who are stereotyped. Through all of the programs and videos and papers, it felt like Starbucks covering their ass more than anything else. The focus wasn't on diversity. It was more of a guy's attempt to tell us not to profile black people, something any self-respecting person should know, and every other race too. So I felt it was a waste of time. Things we already know, things we have already heard about, redundancy for the sake of selfishness and capitalism. Now, I can't confirm any of these people actually work at Starbucks, so take all of that with a grain of salt. But assuming that some of these people are genuine, then we can see that many of these people felt it was forced and ineffective. And based on the articles I just showed you from the Harvard Business Review and Psychology Today, and there are many others, don't get me wrong, forced diversity training backfires. It's going to make people resentful and it's going to make them rebel. You need to give people the voluntary option to do better. Look, I don't like hate speech. Hate speech is typically defined as disparaging someone based on their gender, race, national origin, basically their identity. That's not cool. We shouldn't do it. I encourage everybody who watches this to avoid using that language because we should have real conversations and debate actual ideas. Now, I don't think it should be illegal. I don't think it should be banned because that's not going to encourage anybody to do better. It's going to make them rebel against the system, and the data proves this. If you were to ask me, I'd say the racial bias training at Starbucks was just a PR move. Classic public relations strategy. Get ahead of the story. So when everything was going south for Starbucks, they said, we're going to shut down all the stores in a month and do a racial bias training because we're in front of this. And that changes the story. However, it also shows that Starbucks is weak to public pressure, and this is going to create huge problems for them and other stores in the future. Starbucks changed their policy to say that anybody can use their space and go to their store, use their bathroom, whether or not they pay for anything. That will cause Starbucks to lose money. Maybe they think it's worth it, but now they've opened their doors to anyone. And what Starbucks is doing and how people are reacting is only getting worse. From Andy Ngo, this is insane. Bakery in Portland fired employees after they declined to serve a woman who came in after they were already closed. The woman, a professional equity activist, took out a video camera and claimed she was a victim of racism. And he says, hashtag Starbucks effect. Back to Eden Bakery said, at 9:02 p.m., we were unusually busy for closing time, which is stated as 9 p.m. Most of the seats were filled, and there were 4 people in line waiting to be served. At 9:03 p.m., our employee turns the open sign light off. At 9:04 p.m., 2 more white women walk in and line up to be served. At this point, the customers present are informed that we are officially closed. At 9:06 p.m., Lillian enters and stands in line to be served, assuming, given how many people are still inside, the door is unlocked, that we are still open. Lillian is told we are closed, and the last 2 women in line are the last to be served. After that, she exits the building and begins taking her first video. In this situation, it doesn't really matter that the 2 staff members working are not themselves racist because the call they made to deny Lillian service caused her to feel like she had been discriminated against. Sometimes impact outweighs intent, and when that happens, people do need to be held accountable. Since both Lillian and the clamoring public were demanding that these staff members be fired, that is what we did, putting these 2 young women out of work. It was an incredibly difficult thing for us to do, especially when they felt they were just upholding our closing time of 9 p.m., but the way in which they went about it lacked sensitivity and understanding of the racial implications at work. Some of you have thanked us for the decisive action, and others questioning why there are consequences for these two wage earners and none for the ownership of the company itself. The two women were fired. It is acknowledged they were not racist. They were doing what they were told to do as per store policy. But the store decided to fire them simply because someone felt discriminated against. And this is where we are going. We need to have basic rules in place so we know what we should or shouldn't do. But the rules are breaking down. What these women did at the store was not racist, and simply because someone felt like it was doesn't make it true. We can't just change the rules of our society because one person feels a certain way, because then nothing will actually function properly. We want to end racism, but we can't be authoritarian about it. We want to end hate speech, but we can't be authoritarian about it. We need to be welcoming, understanding, and sometimes bad things happen to good people. But we can't just bend over backwards to accommodate single individuals who aren't playing by the rules. We are handing the keys to the car to bullies, and that's not always true of all people. I don't necessarily believe that this woman in this instance was trying to break the rules, but she was wrong. She wasn't served because the store was closed, and sometimes that happens. We shouldn't fire two wage earners who did nothing wrong because a customer came in after the store was closed. But is this really the Starbucks effect, or is this something else? What do you think about the racial bias training, and what do you think about the Portland incident? Comment below, and again, we will keep the conversation going. You can follow me on Twitter at TimCast. Stay tuned, new videos every day at 4 p.m. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.